For 600 years, one family dominated Europe, not just with armies, but with strategic marriages, forbidden alchemy, and a shadow network that controlled kings and popes alike. This is the story of how the Habsburgs built an empire of secrets, and why their ghosts still haunt the world today. Welcome to Mythic Index, a sanctuary for lost legends and forgotten timelines. Here, we peel back the layers of history to reveal the myths that shaped our world, from the whispers of ancient stone to the mysteries of the cosmos. If you wish to ensure you can always find your way back to this archive, please subscribe now. History finds itself stumped by a central contradiction at the heart of the Habsburg story. Their domain, famously known as the Empire where the sun never set, stretched its influence from Europe all the way across the Atlantic. Their authority felt permanent and divinely ordained, reaching from the marble halls of Vienna to Madrid's opulent palaces, and from mountain strongholds to distant colonies under unfamiliar stars. But now their legacy is reduced to mere fragments, faded portraits, shattered crowns, and a notorious physical abnormality that became part of their genetic signature. This raises a fascinating question. How does something so immense simply vanish, unless its disappearance was deliberately orchestrated? The mystery deepens when you examine the foundations of their power. The Habsburgs stood apart from other empires, which were typically built on military victory. Instead, they expanded their dominion through strategic marriages. One kingdom after another was absorbed not by the sword, but by the intricate web of family connections they created. On the surface, it was a brilliant political strategy. However, hushed rumors in cloisters and court hallways suggested a different story, that these were not just political alliances, but carefully planned rituals. Uncles were wed to nieces, and cousins to cousins, with each new generation eerily replicating the names and faces of the last, as if a great mirror were held up to the royal family. Was this pure chance, or was it a focused obsession with protecting a bloodline they considered sacred? This commitment to preserving pure blood brought both immense power and eventual ruin. The most infamous result of this practice was the Habsburg Jaw, a grotesque physical trait that marked their heirs with deformity. It was as if their own bodies were rebelling against the design. Why would such politically astute rulers intentionally compromise the health of their children? The answer might be that their objective was never physical vitality, but the protection of something far older and more abstract. A spiritual essence they feared would be lost if their lineage was diluted, costing them divine favor. Perhaps they viewed their bloodline less as a mortal inheritance and more as a sacred covenant, a bond tying them to a mystery that ran much deeper than the politics seen during coronations. The Church, for its part, offered its blessing over these unions. Yet every blessing also acted as a restraint. The Vatican's validation, which included coronating their emperors and sanctifying their marriages, turned the dynasty into its most loyal follower. Most saw this as a mutually beneficial partnership. However, records hidden in the echoing archives of cathedrals hint at something far more clandestine. Pacts agreed upon in candle-lit rooms and oaths sworn not to mortals, but to powerful forces veiled in scripture. It makes you wonder how much of the empire truly belonged to the Habsburgs, and how much was merely entrusted to them as keepers of an ancient plan. Whispers also told of relics once held by the Knights Templar, powerful objects of faith thought to have been destroyed during the Order's purge. Curiously, a trail of strange coincidences connects these very relics to monasteries and abbeys operating under Habsburg protection. The dynasty never displayed these artifacts. They were kept concealed, locked away in stone treasuries and tucked inside private libraries. If these relics truly survived and were placed in their care, it would imply that the Templar legacy never actually died out. It simply found a new protector in a family so deeply entwined with the Vatican that no one would ever think to question them. Even their famous title, "The Empire Where the Sun Never Sets," carries a strange and unsettling resonance. It might have been more than a simple boast about their vast geographic reach. Could it have been a coded message, hinting at a duty that transcended mere continents and time zones? The sun could have been a symbol for something eternal, a form of knowledge that could never be allowed to extinguish, a flame to be guarded even as kingdoms crumbled. The great irony, of course, is that their empire did eventually fall. But the phrase itself lives on, echoing in a way that suggests their true inheritance was never about land or armies, but about the invisible river of memory they were tasked with protecting. Their decline also defies any simple historical narrative. While other empires collapsed under the weight of war and rebellion, the Habsburg unraveling felt both unavoidable and strangely intentional. It was as if the entire structure was allowed to crumble once its underlying purpose had been served, leaving behind only ruins and rumors. The questions still hang in the air today. Were they merely the architects of their own downfall, or were they chosen instruments in a mission that spanned centuries? Were their infamous deformities a punishment from nature, or the sacred seals of a pact that could not be broken? To stand in Vienna, beneath the domes of their palaces, is to feel a silence pressing in from the walls, the silence of withheld truths, of unread manuscripts, and of secrets whispered from priest to emperor, too dangerous to ever be written down. It's a silence that challenges us to consider a radical possibility. What if the dynasty never really faded away at all? Before we drift deep into the ancient past, take a second to tap the like button. Think of it as lighting a candle in this digital hall, helping other weary travelers find their way to these stories. What if it simply closed a door, creating the illusion of a final chapter? The paradox is striking. An empire that felt permanent is now gone. A bloodline that obsessed over purity produced profound deformity. A dynasty that governed the world bequeathed only questions. This is where we open the first door, stepping into a corridor of shadows where answers are not lost, but deliberately concealed. The unification of Spain in the late 15th century began with a single wedding, that of Ferdinand of Aragon to Isabella of Castile. This pivotal moment launched the empire's golden age and established a powerful blueprint. The Habsburgs would later refine this strategy, transforming matrimony into a weapon more effective than any sword. They mastered the art of building empires without a single drop of blood being spilled. Seemingly innocent vows, exchanged in candlelit chapels thick with the scent of incense, were in fact contracts that fused entire continents under a single family name. But was there more to these unions than simple politics? Did every ring and blessing hide a more profound purpose, as if the church itself was orchestrating the weaving of bloodlines for some secret reason? Take the 1477 marriage of Maximilian of Habsburg to Mary of Burgundy. Officially, it was a major political victory that gave the Habsburgs the vast lands of Burgundy and placed them at the center of European power. But behind the treaties and dowries, rumors began to spread. It was said this marriage was when unseen forces first began to favor the family. Their rise to power suddenly became unstoppable, as if invisible hands were sweeping away all obstacles. Was this just a stroke of luck, or did this union represent the dynasty entering a sacred pact, turning their weddings from political deals into rituals that followed a hidden agenda? After this point, their strategy was clear. Charles V stood as the ultimate product of these calculated unions, inheriting the crowns of both Spain and Austria. His empire was so vast, stretching from the Iberian Peninsula to the New World and from Vienna to the Netherlands, that it was said the sun never set upon it. A look at his ancestry, however, reveals something peculiar. It's less a family tree and more an echo chamber, with branches curling back on themselves. The same names and faces appear over and over, making you question if their blood contained something so valuable it could never be weakened. While the Church gave these marriages its blessing, an underlying tension remained. Was the Vatican simply endorsing shrewd politics, or was it actively protecting a bloodline connected to ancient secrets stretching all the way back to Jerusalem? Legends began to wrap around these weddings like ivy. Whispers in Spanish monasteries claimed the Habsburg bloodline held a trace of something far older than Europe, a link to the line of King David, or perhaps something even more ancient. Whether this was pure fiction or a myth cultivated to justify their divine right to rule, it provided a powerful reason for their obsession with keeping the bloodline pure. The frequent marriages to cousins and nieces were not accidents, they were intentional choices. This practice became so common it felt like a ritual, with each ceremony seemingly reaffirming a silent, ancient promise. But this promise came at a terrible price. You can see the consequences etched into the very bones of their descendants. The jutting jaw, the misaligned teeth, and facial features so distorted they resembled masks, these became the infamous family curse. At the same time, these physical traits were undeniable evidence of just how ferociously and how fragilely the bloodline was being protected. It begs the question, why would emperors who controlled half the known world endanger their own lineage to protect a myth? The only logical answer is that they believed diluting their blood would destroy something more important than power itself, something they were more afraid of losing than their own crowns. The wedding ceremonies were shrouded in secrets. Beyond the public vows made at the altar, secret pacts were made in private. Cardinals and priests didn't just witness marriages, they oversaw whispered oaths of allegiance between monarchs and the Church. The Vatican was no mere spectator in this. It was a silent partner, the master architect who made sure every new union bound the dynasty ever closer to its own power. This grand design needed a headquarters, and for the Habsburgs that center was Vienna. The city, often wrapped in mist rolling off the Danube, has always felt like more than just a capital. To wander its narrow streets at night, as the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral echo off the stonework, is to feel that a deep silence, filled with secrets, lies just beneath all the music and grandeur. The Habsburgs established Vienna as their empire's beating heart. However, the true pulse of their power was not found in public halls, but in secure vaults carved out deep beneath the city's palaces and monasteries. What secrets are preserved down there in the shadows, far from where any tourist will ever go? Think of documents that were never copied, maps that were never published, and contracts that were never broken. It suggests Europe's authentic history might not be recorded on the walls of its universities, but is instead locked away in the archives of its rulers, guarded as if they were relics too dangerous to ever be released. In the Habsburg Palace today, visitors are captivated by the gilded chambers and stunning Baroque ceilings. Yet, deep below those marble floors lie rooms that are almost never opened. Whispered records suggest that treaties signed in Vienna weren't just between kings and nations. They often included silent partners, cloaked in the robes of the church, who operated beneath the layers of music, feasting, and official ceremonies. It was here, in these secret meetings, where words spoken in low tones would decide the fate of entire nations. The Habsburgs forged bonds in this way that were far stronger than any army, creating agreements sealed not with military might, but with sacred oaths carried into vaults where the ink would never fade. You have to wonder why such agreements needed to be kept hidden from history, unless their contents revealed a power structure that would shatter our conventional understanding of the world. The city's musical reputation, therefore, holds a delicious irony. While the symphonies of Haydn and Mozart filled its golden theaters, the genuine music of Habsburg power was silence, the muffled thud of a vault door closing, the whisper of keys turning in ancient locks. Chronicles tell of what lay behind those locks, maps where Europe's borders were precisely drawn decades before the wars that would eventually establish them. If the Habsburgs already knew the outlines of the future, who could have possibly given them that knowledge? Could it have been their advisors from the Vatican, the timeless guardians of a power that extended far beyond its magnificent walls in Rome? The Vatican's influence wasn't confined to its frescoed ceilings and marble colonnades. To truly grasp the Habsburg story, one must recognize that their crowns were not self-proclaimed. An authority claiming a direct line to God, through hands anointed with holy oil, placed those crowns upon their heads. While the family donned the dazzling regalia of emperors, their actual right to rule was hammered out within the Pope's private chambers. Divine blessings secured their power, but these blessings came with heavy political strings attached. This raises a crucial question. Was this divine favor a gift, or was it a contract that obligated the dynasty to act as the church's most loyal enforcer? With every rise to power, the the Vatican's unseen influence was a guiding force. For instance, Maximilian I's ambition to become Holy Roman Emperor required the Pope's endorsement to become an accepted fact. Similarly, the Church framed Charles V's vast inheritance of both Spanish and Austrian thrones as a preordained fate from God, not just a stroke of incredible luck. But the elaborate coronation ceremonies concealed something far more compelling than just pageantry. The Pope's role extended beyond bestowing blessings. It involved demanding sworn promises, crafting secret agreements, and issuing quiet directives. Within the hushed marble corridors, the Vatican's behavior was less that of a witness and more of an architect. We are told that history is set in stone, yet so much remains buried in the sand. If you believe there are truths about our past that are still waiting to be uncovered, just type the word "hidden" in the comments. It serves as a quiet signal that you are listening. This suggests the Habsburgs might never have wielded true sovereignty, but were instead caretakers of power, entrusted with it only as long as they followed a clandestine script. The paradox deepens when you examine the character of these papal blessings. While a crown from the Pope conferred legitimacy, it also fastened invisible chains on the monarch. After an emperor knelt before the Pope, he could no longer assert that his authority was solely his own. An unspoken question lingered behind every law enacted, every war declared, and every marriage arranged. Was this the will of the monarch or the will of the Church? The Vatican's influence was subtle enough to be overlooked during grand ceremonies, yet it was heavy enough to weigh on every single decision. Why would the Habsburgs, with their immense armies and sprawling territories, consistently submit to this unseen power, unless the very authority they protected was otherworldly, and its preservation could only be guaranteed by the Church? Persistent, though unproven, stories claim that papal envoys brought more to Vienna than just blessings. These tales speak of sealed scrolls, ciphers, and sacred relics delivered only to emperors bound by both their bloodline and a sacred oath. Some theories propose these were remnants of the Templar archives, smuggled out of France after that order was suppressed. Other accounts suggest they were manuscripts rescued from the ruins of Constantinople, containing knowledge from the East once believed to be gone forever. Why would such treasures be handed to secular leaders, unless those leaders weren't truly secular at all, but were instead chosen guardians bound by a sacred pact? If that were the case, the Vatican's influence went far beyond politics. It was actively molding the dynasty into a specialized vessel, a means to keep dangerous information safely under Church oversight without anyone noticing. In return, the Habsburgs reaped significant rewards from this partnership. Their empire grew, their strategic marriages unified continents, and their adversaries frequently faced excommunication or political isolation. Papal authority consistently reinforced their territorial claims, but this support was not without its cost. The dynasty complied any time the Vatican insisted on obedience. When the winds of Protestantism began blowing through Europe, the Habsburgs became the Church's weapon, fighting wars that ravaged nations for decades. They defended the faith with blood, driven not just by belief, but by the fact that their very legitimacy was tied to it. Is it possible that the conflicts we know as religious wars were actually the overt manifestation of hidden agreements and obligations forged centuries earlier? Even the dynasty's official titles betray the sheer depth of the Vatican's sway. The Holy Roman Emperor was designated the defender of Christendom, tasked with protecting the faith from heretics and non-believers. These were not simply honorary titles, they were duties disguised as honors. Behind the pomp of every coronation was a quiet warning: your throne stands only because we permit it, and it will be lost if you fail. From this perspective, the Vatican was less a partner and more a master puppeteer, pulling strings that were invisible yet unbreakable. Still, if the dynasty was just a puppet, how did it last for so long and manage such a vast domain? It could be that the strings themselves were forged from belief, and belief is a material far stronger than iron. It is unsettling how frequently papal intervention lines up with critical moments in the dynasty's history. The Spanish Inquisition expanded under Habsburg monarchs, with full sanction from Rome. When new territories were carved up, papal decrees legitimized the new borders, demanding loyalty not just to kings, but to the Church. Whenever the dynasty faced a threat, papal diplomacy consistently stepped in to save it from collapse. Time and again, the Vatican's influence is found not on the periphery but at the very heart of events, steering outcomes as if following a script hidden from everyone else. Were the Habsburgs the masters of their own fate, or were they simply actors fulfilling roles assigned to them ages ago? Some have theorized that the Vatican recognized in the Habsburgs what it had once found in the Knights Templar, loyal guardians who could expertly wield both the sword and the secrets. The Templars had been brought down for becoming too powerful, their knowledge scattered to the winds. Yet the Church still required custodians, protectors capable of holding on to knowledge too hazardous to be made public. The Habsburgs, bound by their lineage and their obedience, were the ideal successors. This would account for their extraordinary rise, their remarkable talent for navigating crises, and their endurance even as their power faded. If this is true, their empire was less a product of chance marriages and warfare, and more of a deliberate construction, built to protect what the Church itself could not openly hold. To stand inside St. Peter's Basilica today is to feel the immense weight of silent centuries. The marble shines and the mosaics are brilliant, but a hidden continuity flows just beneath the surface. The Habsburgs knelt in this very place, their crowns awaiting them on altars, their destinies shaped by words spoken softly in Latin. We view their empires through a political lens, but their story is fundamentally entwined with the shadow of the Vatican. Could the dynasty's true purpose have been not to govern Europe, but to safeguard the Church's most perilous secrets? And if so, what happened to those secrets after the emperors were deposed and the vaults were sealed? The invisible hand is still there, its touch evident across the ages, undeniable but unspoken. The Vatican crowned, blessed, and steered the dynasty, but it also concealed, orchestrating its ascent not for power alone, but for guardianship. The question still hangs in the air. Was the Habsburg legacy one of empire, or was it one of servitude to a secret pact? The quiet vaults of the Vatican provide no answer, only the faint echo of chains that seem to clatter still in the shadows of memory. The Templars supposedly vanished in flames and confessions, with their order dissolved by a papal decree and their leaders burned at the stake in Paris as the sun rose. Officially, their memory was wiped clean, their power shattered. But sometimes, what history presents as total extinction is merely a masterful illusion of survival. In the centuries following the Templars' fall, faint traces of their existence began to emerge in the very places where the Habsburgs were cementing their power. This suggests the Knights may not have been eradicated at all, but simply underwent a transformation, finding sanctuary within a new court and concealing themselves behind the splendor of a dynasty. Is it possible that the same family that governed Europe was also the guardian of a heritage considered too potent to be left unprotected? The link between them is pieced together from tantalizing fragments and enduring legends. Tales circulate of treasure smuggled out of France right before the Templars were crushed, loaded onto ships that sailed into myth, or stashed in monasteries still loyal to the Church. Many contend this treasure wasn't precious metals or gems, but rather a hoard of manuscripts, relics, and knowledge deemed too explosive for rivals to possess. The Vatican may have issued a public condemnation of the order, but could it have privately ensured its legacy's survival by entrusting it to its most steadfast allies? With their ties of blood and fealty, the Habsburgs would have been the perfect custodians, strong enough to keep the secrets safe, yet loyal enough to prevent them from ever being shared. Vienna itself seems to hold clues to this hidden inheritance. Within its winding network of palaces and abbeys, stories circulated about emperors taking counsel from knights dressed in simple attire. No official record of their advice exists, yet their influence was said to be profound. Court historians made cryptic notes about anonymous benefactors arriving with chests filled with documents, only to depart leaving nothing but silence behind. Who could these men have been? If not the last vestiges of a brotherhood believed to be extinct, then perhaps the Templars were never actually destroyed. It's possible they were reborn, their armor traded for scholarly robes, and their iconic banner woven discreetly into the tapestry of dynastic authority. Consider also the strange recurrence of their symbols. The Templar cross, despite being officially banned, would subtly materialize in Habsburg coats of arms, find its way into the stonework of chapels, and be engraved on rings passed down through the family. Were these just artistic coincidences or quiet signals that the order's spirit endured, protected under the dynasty's patronage? Even more intriguing are the records of marriages orchestrated with families that once held ties to Templar properties, hinting at a deliberate preservation of specific bloodlines in secret. Were these simple political maneuvers or the careful continuation of a hidden fraternity? A paradox becomes clear when we contrast the Habsburgs' public persona with what they kept hidden. They presented themselves as the champions of Catholic doctrine, the sworn defenders of the Church, and the enforcers of papal edicts. In private, however, the silence surrounding specific archives and relics implies they were tasked with protecting materials the world was never meant to see. Could their intense devotion to the Church have been driven by more than just faith? Perhaps it was the heavy responsibility of their guardianship, the understanding that any exposure could unravel not just their own dynasty, but the very foundations of the Vatican. The official justification for suppressing the Templars involved accusations of heresy, idolatry, and blasphemy. Yet, historians have consistently pointed out how weak this evidence was, with a startling lack of proof to bring down such a massive organization. What if the real motive wasn't heresy at all, but rather possession? The possession of knowledge too significant to exist outside of direct control. If that were the case, the order would have to disappear from public view while continuing in private, its essence absorbed by a dynasty capable of shouldering its immense legacy. The Habsburgs, with their lineage fortified by strategic unions, evolved into something more than just rulers. They became the protectors of something far more ancient than their own line. Spanish folklore tells of chests secretly brought to monasteries right after the Templars' collapse, watched over by monks until they were quietly moved to royal vaults under Habsburg authority. Some stories claim these chests held maps depicting lands across the Atlantic, knowledge that predated Columbus, with charts that were scrubbed from public view but kept safe in the shadows. If this is true, then the great voyages that built Spain's empire might not have been acts of discovery, but rather acts of recovery, steered by information that had been long suppressed. Was it merely a coincidence that the dynasty inheriting these treasures also happened to rule the empire that would go on to reshape the world? Or was this grand expansion part of a master plan, outlined in hidden manuscripts centuries before? The Knights Templar were master builders, engineers, and visionaries. Their ruined fortresses still dot the European landscape, standing as silent monuments to an order that was erased but never forgotten. It's noteworthy that within the Habsburg domains, these ruins were often left undisturbed, treated with a peculiar level of reverence. Was this simple nostalgia or a form of recognition? It's possible the dynasty saw them not as relics of a defunct brotherhood, but as markers of their own secret inheritance, reminders etched in stone that their role as guardians was not a political fluke, but a sacred duty. Persistent folktales, though often dismissed by mainstream scholars, describe certain Habsburg emperors holding private meetings with men identified as warrior monks belonging to no official order. These advisors were known to speak rarely, but carried an undeniable authority that captivated all who listened. While these figures are absent from official portraits, their influence casts a long shadow over the dynasty's most critical decisions. Could they have been the living descendants of a lineage that was purged from historical records but survived in the flesh? Were they serving as ambassadors for a secret brotherhood, reborn and still pulling the strings from behind the curtain? The quiet gaps in history are often more telling than the recorded facts. We are told the Templars met a disgraceful end, but their name, their symbols, and their legend refused to vanish. At the same time, The Habsburgs wielded a level of power that military strength alone could never fully account for. The speed of their ascent and the toughness of their reign defy simple explanation. This fuels speculation about a hidden continuity, a torch passed from the condemned Knights Templar to these golden-crowned emperors. An intriguing question hangs in the air. What if the Templars never vanished, but instead assimilated into the very dynasty sworn to protect the faith? Imagine the secrets that would have been kept within the shadows of their courts, perhaps still waiting in silent, stone-sealed vaults for a time when they can be revealed. An empire of such magnitude would normally feature a wide variety of faces in its lineage. The Habsburgs, however, became notorious for a chilling uniformity. Across the generations, the same faces, features, and even names appeared again and again, making their portraits seem less like unique creations and more like variations on a single template. Visitors to their galleries note an unsettling resemblance extending beyond posture and into the very bone. Protruding jaws, full lips, and a gaze that was both regal and strange defined their appearance. Their faces effectively became mirrors, reflecting each other down the centuries until the family itself resembled a genetic echo chamber. Maintaining such an unnatural resemblance only makes sense if the resemblance itself was the goal. Officially, the Habsburgs' constant intermarriage was a tool of politics, used to cement alliances and bind kingdoms together with family ties. Yet, pervasive whispers suggest a ritualistic motive behind these marriages, an obsession with preserving a pure essence, not merely a pure line of inheritance. The concept of blood purity was ancient, echoing myths of sacred lineages destined to carry a divine spark. From a modern perspective, this level of inbreeding looks incredibly reckless. For the dynasty, however, it was a calculated strategy, as if the risk of deformity was an acceptable price for protecting something invisible. Perhaps their fixation wasn't madness, but a profound dedication to an old belief system, one that held that to thin their blood was to forfeit their very right to rule. The legendary consequences of this practice are captured in the tragic figure of Charles II of Spain. He was the living embodiment of the dynasty's paradox. His jaw was so disfiguringly large, his health so fragile, and his intellect so limited, yet he was treated with a reverence suggesting his bloodline transcended personal weakness. His many ailments baffled physicians, courtiers gossiped about curses, and the public saw his condition as a powerful omen. Was he simply the unfortunate product of genetic decay, or was he the intended sacrificial result of a dynasty willing to sacrifice the body to save what it considered divine? Despite his frailty, the crown stayed on his head. His survival itself offered as proof that the bloodline's purpose had been met. In Vienna's chapels and Madrid's palaces, weddings evolved from celebrations into solemn ceremonies of preservation. Vows were exchanged between cousins whose faces were so alike they could have been mistaken for siblings. While outsiders found it strange, insiders understood the ritual as essential for continuing a design that predated the empire. Priests would bless these unions with great solemnity, transforming a political maneuver into a sacred act. Did the church grant its approval because it believed the dynasty's claims, or because it too saw a hidden purpose in preserving this lineage? The theme of repetition went beyond faces to their very names. A relentless cycle of Charles, Ferdinand, and Philip seemed to blur the lines of history, making generations indistinguishable. Was this just tradition or another piece of the ritual? To repeat a name is to repeat an identity, summoning continuity. Perhaps the Habsburgs aimed to merge their lineage into a single, perpetual sovereign whose being transcended death. Each new heir, then, was not an individual ruler, but another mirror reflecting an eternal monarch, kept alive through blood, face, and name. The dynasty's fascination with mirrors even found its way into their art. In palaces across Europe, they built halls of reflection that multiplied their likenesses endlessly. With candles flickering against the glass, a visitor couldn't tell where reality ended and reflection began. These rooms were more than decoration. They were symbolic declarations that the Habsburgs were infinite, their lineage eternal. Was this supreme arrogance, or was it a ritual in its own right, an effort to manifest in architecture the belief that their bloodline could not decay? And yet, beneath this splendor, the whispers of deformity persisted. The Habsburg jaw became infamous, a physical trait so distinct that doctors still identify it in portraits today. But what if this was more than a biological side effect? What if it became a badge of honor? It could have been a visible sign that their devotion to purity was real, a mark etched into their flesh as a sacrifice the bloodline itself required, much like how a monk might bear the marks of his devotion. In the same way, the Habsburgs wore the physical marks of their own covenant, bearing deformities that proved they prioritized their lineage above all else. What if that shocking appearance wasn't a source of embarrassment, but was instead a testament to loyalty for a hidden promise? Old stories from Spanish villages spoke of omens, claiming the very earth would groan beneath the burden of these family unions. They said that tempests would brew whenever one of these marriages was performed, and that church bells in faraway towns would ring all on their own. For the common person, these were clear signs that the dynasty was not merely mortal, but was connected to forces far beyond normal life. While scholars today might write these tales off as simple folklore, what if folklore is just memory that's become a little fuzzy over time? What if it recalls truths that people have stopped speaking about openly? It's possible the physical deformities, the strange storms, and all the omens were connected. They could have been signals that the family's blood was both a great blessing and a terrible burden. Even now, a walk through a gallery of their portraits can leave you with a deep sense of unease. From inside the frames, their eyes seem to follow you, their jaws thrust forward, their lips hanging slack. Every face is distinct, yet somehow they all look the same. This constant repetition becomes overwhelming, making you feel as though you aren't looking at individuals, but at a single being, copied over and over again. Could this have been their true purpose all along? Were they trying to erase the individual in the name of perfect, unending continuity, to become a living reflection of themselves? The contradiction is impossible to ignore. The very purity that defined their identity also guaranteed their downfall. The same strategic unions that protected their unique essence also shattered their strength. Their obsession with their bloodline produced heirs who were too delicate to rule, yet it simultaneously cemented the powerful myth that their blood was sacred. Was this paradox a simple accident of history, or was it the unavoidable result of their devotion to a secret belief system? Perhaps they didn't see their decline as a failure at all, but as proof that they had perfectly fulfilled their cosmic role. They may have believed they had preserved their essence just long enough for it to be passed into the care of another. The mirrors are still there, both in the portraits and in our collective memory. Every face is a repeat, every name is an echo, and every marriage was a ritual. The dynasty became something other than a family. It became a reflection, its disfigurements transformed into powerful symbols of its faithfulness to a covenant that was never written down, only enacted through blood. What if their true legacy wasn't an empire, but the preservation of that mirror, an eternal face staring back at us from history, unchanged, unnerving, and unexplained? If you look at maps of Europe from the Habsburg era, you'll see clearly defined borders, with kingdoms and provinces all neatly organized. But those cartographic lines were a clever illusion, symbols of power meant for the public. Behind that visible geography, an entirely different landscape existed, invisible to most people. It was a hidden network of influence that tied Vienna to Madrid, linked Brussels with Naples, and connected Prague to the New World. The dynasty's real power wasn't found in its territories, but in the secret connections that held its distant realms together. These connections didn't just cross borders, they ran through the unseen hallways of faith, finance, and whispered promises. Could it be that the geography we see in textbooks is just the surface layer, and that underneath it all lies a map of power that was never meant to be seen? Think about the famous phrase associated with the Habsburgs, the empire on which the sun never sets. For most, this simply meant their dominion was so enormous that daylight was always shining on at least one part of it. But for those who understood, the phrase had a much deeper meaning. The sun never set because their influence wasn't limited by land or by time zones. It stretched invisibly across oceans, woven into marriage contracts, secret agreements with monasteries, and treaties that were signed in complete silence. For them, the world wasn't a collection of separate countries. It was a single, massive piece of fabric they could fold into a unified system of control, held together with invisible stitches. From Spain, their galleons brought back silver and gold from the Americas. But mixed in with the treasure were strange charts, mysterious artifacts, and maps that seemed far older than the discoveries themselves. Rumors swirled in Vienna that these objects were whisked away to secret vaults, with their true origins kept completely hidden. Is it possible the dynasty knew about the New World long before Columbus ever set sail, having inherited that knowledge from Templar archives or even older civilizations now forgotten? If that's true, then their expansion across the globe wasn't just exploration. It was the careful execution of a grand design already written down in secret manuscripts. The official maps they showed the world might have been a deliberate deception, while the true maps, drawn in secret, were the ones shaping the course of history from the shadows. In the Low Countries, their control connected them to trade routes that stretched from the Atlantic to the Baltic. Merchants there traded in cloth, spices, and metals, but hidden within this commerce were coded messages. Some contracts were found with strange symbols on them, notations that looked more like astrological signs than accounting notes. Could these have been indicators of secret societies, ensuring that even business became another tool in their web of control? The Habsburgs didn't just rule kingdoms, they managed vast networks, maritime, financial, and spiritual, that bound Europe together in a geometry of power that no mapmaker ever dared to draw. Even inside Europe, the reach of their influence often ignored political boundaries. Monasteries tucked away in remote valleys answered not just to the church, but also to the dynasty, protecting ancient manuscripts and treasures in vaults that only trusted agents could access. Hidden routes connected these secret outposts, using roads that were never marked on official maps but were remembered in the whispers of local people. Pilgrims often walked these paths, never realizing their true purpose. These unsuspecting travelers believed they were treading sacred ground, when in reality they were navigating corridors of immense power. Consider for a moment that Europe's true map wasn't defined by mountains or rivers. Instead, picture a hidden network of influential pathways, where secrets flowed like the very lifeblood coursing through a body. This reveals a striking paradox. The dynasty's authority often seemed invincible, even in moments when its military forces were failing on the battlefield. While physical borders could easily be redrawn, the Habsburgs' influence endured. The reason for this resilience is that their empire was constructed on a metaphysical plane, not a physical one. It was a sophisticated web of allegiances, sacred relics, and binding agreements that existed far beyond the reach of any army. Their invisible map stayed completely intact, even when they suffered a military loss. Could this intricate web have been their actual empire, with the lands shown on official documents serving only as its public face? Central European legends tell of shadow maps, rumored to be hidden away in Jesuit archives. These drawings supposedly depicted the secret conduits of power, rather than physical terrain. On these unique maps, cities were replaced by monasteries, roads gave way to clandestine routes, and borders were marked by esoteric symbols. It was said that laying eyes on such a map was like witnessing the world's hidden structure, the true architecture behind reality's facade. If these maps were real, were the Habsburgs using them to steer destiny itself, not just to rule over territories? This unseen geometry was even mirrored in the design of their palaces. Whether in Vienna, Madrid, or Prague, the arrangement of grand halls and private chapels frequently corresponded with celestial alignments. It was as if the architecture was a map in its own right, carving the dynasty's secret knowledge directly into stone. An ordinary visitor might only perceive opulence, but an initiate would recognize the deliberate design. What if the empire's true geography wasn't on parchment, but was instead inscribed on walls, ceilings, and in sacred patterns, unseen by the common eye, yet clear to anyone who knew the code. Through their colonial governors and merchants, the Habsburgs' influence reached even further, yet the allegiance of these agents was never to a nation in the modern sense. Their loyalty was to the dynasty, and perhaps to something greater, the covenant that connected them to the church and its hidden order. This network proved to be incredibly resilient, not fragile. It withstood wars, survived revolutions, and even outlasted the dynasty's eventual fall. It's possible that it endures today, an invisible but lasting geometry of power that continues to influence our world long after the royal crowns lost their shine. A haunting question still lingers. What if the borders we see on our maps are just a distraction, and the real course of history is charted in shadows, through undocumented oaths and unmapped connections? Could the true Habsburg legacy be this invisible geography they engineered, a map we are all still navigating without ever knowing it? Every throne comes with a crown, but the one worn by the Habsburgs was different. It was a borrowed weight. Their power was wrapped not just in gold and velvet, but also in the profound shadow of the cross. Their coronations were magnificent spectacles filled with soaring choirs, swirling incense, and the blessings of bishops. But a paradox was revealed the moment an emperor knelt at the altar. While the crown glittered with precious jewels, it was placed on his head by the church. That single act fundamentally blurred the distinction between being a master and being a servant. Were these rulers commanding from on high, or were they guardians humbly kneeling below? The Vatican's influence was discreet yet total. The very title of Holy Roman Emperor carried with it a divine mandate to defend Christendom, uphold the Catholic faith, and safeguard the Church. However, these grandiose words were also a set of chains. To wear the crown meant accepting a lifetime of obedience. Every conflict against heretics, every campaign against non-believers, and every action to crush a rebellion transformed from a political option into a sacred duty. The Habsburgs became the sword of the altar, and the altar always requires a sacrifice. Could their authority truly be considered their own when it was sanctified in a manner that guaranteed they would always be dependent? The paradox only gets deeper when you look at how their faith and their right to rule were woven together. On one hand, the dynasty claimed its legitimacy came directly from God. To oppose them was to defy heaven itself. On the other hand, the church held their destiny in its hands and could revoke that legitimacy just as quickly as it was granted. The threat of excommunication hung over any ruler who dared to disobey. Consequently, the Habsburgs, with all their armies and wealth, were often left helpless by the mere whisper of a priest. How could a monarch ruling half the world be humbled by a single religious edict? The only explanation is that his crown was never really his to begin with. And yet, evidence suggests the Habsburgs didn't just resign themselves to this arrangement, they embraced it. Some of them viewed themselves less as sovereigns and more as chosen instruments for a mission that was far bigger than any empire. This core belief shaped their identity, driving them not just to rule, but to preserve. What they were preserving, precisely, is still a mystery. Was it simply the supremacy of the Church, or was it something far more ancient, arcane knowledge and relics for which they served as guardians? The Vatican's blessing wasn't just about politics. It was granted because their bloodline had proven itself loyal, obedient, and willing to sacrifice to keep dangerous truths shielded from the world. Think about the brutal wars of religion that tore Europe apart. When the Protestant Reformation challenged the very foundations of Catholic authority, the Habsburgs emerged as its most resolute defenders. They sacrificed countless lives and vast fortunes in decades of war, fighting as if their very existence was at stake, not just their power. To lose would mean more than a weakened empire. It would shatter the sacred bond with the Church that was the cornerstone of their identity. So, did the dynasty fight for its faith, or did it fight for the invisible covenant that tied its lineage to the Vatican's secrets? Perhaps there is very little difference between the two. Inside palaces and abbeys, coronation regalia like crowns, orbs, scepters, and robes were protected with an almost mystical devotion, as if they possessed power beyond mere symbolism. Some legends even whisper that certain artifacts, gemstones in crowns or fragments hidden within crucifixes, were originally relics possessed by the Knights Templar, quietly passed into their care. Knowledge grows when it is shared. If you know a fellow seeker, or just someone who needs a peaceful escape into the past, feel free to share this video with them. If these whispers hold true, then the very act of a Habsburg coronation was transformed. It ceased to be a simple ceremony of political ascension and became instead a profound ritual of continuity, where the dynasty reaffirmed an ancient duty inherited from clandestine brotherhoods. The crown placed upon an emperor's head may have sparkled with jewels, but its real value was symbolic, representing a sacred trust to protect secrets far too old and dangerous for the light of day. Contemporaries were often baffled by the family's almost supernatural ability to withstand catastrophe. Entire armies could be shattered, vast territories could be lost, and designated heirs could pass away without producing children, yet the Habsburg dynasty always persisted. It was as if they were protected by a force far more reliable than mere luck. Could this incredible resilience be explained by their deep-seated pact with the Church, an alliance that offered not just sanctification but a tangible shield? Time and again, papal negotiators would step in to rescue them from the brink of disaster, spinning intricate webs of diplomacy that guaranteed their continuation. But perhaps this was about more than just politics. What if the dynasty's survival was an absolute necessity, ordained by a higher power to ensure their guardianship of these secrets never faltered? In that light, the Church simply could not permit the Habsburgs to be destroyed, because their collapse would threaten to reveal what was always meant to stay hidden. This arrangement, however, was never straightforward. A constant friction existed within the dynasty between the impulse for absolute sovereignty and the obligation of servitude. They wrestled between the innate desire to rule on their own terms and the unavoidable need to bow to a higher spiritual authority. Some emperors chafed against this reality, while others fully leaned into their role, but not a single one could ever truly break free. To wear the Habsburg crown was to willingly accept the accompanying chain. Herein lies the dynasty's most haunting paradox. They appeared to be the undisputed masters of Europe, yet they may have secretly been its most obedient servants. Their staggering power could have been an elaborate illusion, permitted to exist only to safeguard the Church's unseen influence. The familiar imagery of the crown and the cross endures in our collective memory. We see countless paintings of emperors on their knees while bishops stand over them, hands raised in a gesture of blessing. Yet, one has to wonder who held the real authority in those moments. Was it the figure adorned in gold, or was it the institution that placed the crown upon his head? The question hangs in the air, deeply unsettling, suggesting the magnificent spectacle of empire might have concealed a profound emptiness at its center. It's possible the Habsburgs themselves understood this arrangement, accepting that their crowns were less a symbol of their own power and more a badge of their sacred duty, worn not for their own glory, but to preserve a truth veiled in shadow. And so we find ourselves circling back to this central contradiction. A dynasty renowned for ruling half the known world might have, in reality, been its most dedicated janitors. Their crowns were not trophies won through conquest, but seals representing a vow of obedience. Perhaps the true seat of power was never located in grand palaces or with mighty armies, but at the quiet altar where silent pacts were sworn, binding emperors with promises stronger than any iron fetters. If this is the case, then the entire history of Europe is reframed. It's no longer a tale of kings and nations, but of crowns bending to the cross, of vast empires built not on free will, but in service to mysteries we were never intended to understand. This very service to a hidden purpose is where we find the most glaring contradictions at the dynasty's core. The central paradox becomes impossible to ignore. This was a family that publicly punished heresy while privately preserving texts branded as heretical. They stood as defenders of the Church, yet were whispered to give shelter to the last embers of orders the Church itself had condemned. While they proclaimed a pure and unwavering faith, they openly welcomed alchemists, astrologers, and mystics into their courts. Reconciling these actions is impossible unless their historical role was a facade. What if they were given two missions at once? To act as the public face of orthodoxy, while secretly collecting and protecting fragments of knowledge the Vatican could not afford to destroy. It suggests their courts were less about wielding power and more like clandestine archives, where forbidden sciences and relics could survive in quiet, waiting for a time when the world was ready for them, or perhaps never. We can even see hints of this in their art. Paintings the Habsburgs paid for frequently showed more than just saints and religious scenes. They were filled with coded messages. Celestial bodies, alchemical symbols, and geometric patterns were woven into the compositions, speaking a language that only an initiate could understand. For the average person, these were beautiful works of devotion. For someone with the right knowledge, they were complex manuscripts rendered in color and light. Is it possible the dynasty used art as a form of hidden vault, concealing science within faith to guarantee its survival without ever being discovered? The persistent whispers about bloodlines, relics, and alchemy simply refuse to fade away. They follow the dynasty's history like the faint but constant scent of incense in an old chapel, always there just beneath the surface. Maybe we tend to ignore these stories because they feel too strange, too contradictory, and too unsettling to be true. But truth is often found hiding within contradictions. Could the Habsburgs' real strength have come not from their armies or their strategic marriages, but from the dangerous duty of protecting things that were supposed to have been destroyed? They were keepers of secrets too explosive to reveal, too holy to let perish, and too forbidden to ever share. A heavy, impenetrable silence surrounds it all, as if the relics, manuscripts, and alchemical texts are still locked away in vaults protected by both stone and memory. We are left holding questions instead of answers, seeing only fragments instead of a clear picture. Did the dynasty actively use this forbidden knowledge, or were they merely custodians, never permitted to understand the full truth they guarded? What if their entire empire wasn't built on land and titles, but on the invisible burden of secrets, passed down through blood, sealed by silence, and carried like a hidden flame through the centuries? In Madrid, the golden light of empire once illuminated palaces where monarchs displayed immense grandeur. But behind these shimmering exteriors, omens lingered that disturbed even the most devout. It was here, with the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs, that the dynasty's glory was at its peak, carrying both the wealth of the New World and the weight of mysteries spoken of only in shadows. More than anywhere else, this is where the paradox of immense success and gradual decay showed itself most clearly. While Spain's dominion spanned the globe, its own royal chambers held signs, symbols, and afflictions suggesting a darker foundation beneath all the gold. Was Spain's golden age constructed not just on conquest and treasure, but also on secret agreements, pacts whose price was paid with absolute silence? Philip II, who is remembered as Catholicism's greatest defender, was the one who built El Escorial, that colossal monastery palace that looms like a fortress of stone and shadow. To any visitor, it was a profound symbol of faith, a monument to the glory of God and the empire. Yet its severe and imposing geometry feels less like a palace and more like a massive labyrinth, with its chambers aligned to celestial events and its corridors running toward sealed vaults. Legend says that inside these vaults were not only the relics of saints, but also forbidden manuscripts, books seized by the Inquisition that were never actually burned. Why go to the trouble of preserving what you were supposed to destroy? The only explanation is that the dynasty, while publicly denouncing heresy, was secretly tasked with safeguarding knowledge deemed too dangerous to exist, locking it away behind walls that were disguised as piety. Even the personal chambers of Philip himself were said to hold strange signs. Historians of the time noted his deep obsession with omens, eclipses, violent storms, and the sudden deaths of his heirs. He was described by some as a haunted man, whose faith was at once unyielding and brittle, as if he knew he was serving powers far greater than his own throne. Was he only afraid of God? Or did he also fear the silence from the Vatican's vaults, where the true nature of his inheritance was kept. Perhaps his deep devotion was not just religious piety, but a quiet acknowledgement that his family's purpose was less about ruling and more about guardianship, a duty performed under the ever-watchful eye of the Church. The symbols carved into El Escorial itself hint at something more than mere architecture. Certain windows are perfectly aligned with the solstices. The proportions of some rooms seem to echo the principles of sacred geometry. While many scholars write these details off as coincidence, their incredible precision makes accidents seem unlikely. Was El Escorial a coded building, a monument not just to an empire but to esoteric knowledge preserved in stone? If that's true, then Spain's monarchs spent their days walking through a living map of mysteries, their palace a vault of encoded secrets. To the outside world it was grandeur. To an initiate it may have been a message, and with every passing generation the omens grew heavier. The Spanish Habsburgs, even more so than their Austrian cousins, began to show the physical and mental toll of their strange obsessions. This profound physical and mental toll found its ultimate expression in Charles II, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. Here was a man who personified the dynasty's core contradiction. His body was frail and racked with illness, yet his bloodline made him a sacred figurehead. His noticeable deformities were reinterpreted as a holy symbol, as if the family's intense dedication to blood purity had been physically carved into his own form. So was his life merely a tragedy? Or could it be seen as the ultimate display of devotion to a pact that required the body's sacrifice to protect a spiritual essence? His reign concluded in a barren quiet, without an heir to his name. But this silence feels too intentional, too perfectly staged, making his entire existence seem like the final act in a very long ceremony. Hushed stories circulated through Madrid about entire chambers being sealed upon his death, their contents of documents and relics concealed so thoroughly that no heir could ever uncover them. Monks claimed that strange signs materialized in the heavens as he passed away, and that church bells began to toll without anyone pulling their ropes. For the average person, these events were clear signs of God's intervention. But for the dynasty's own historians, they were solemn warnings, evidence that the bloodline had completed its mission and was not meant to continue. Is it possible that the decline of Spain was not simply a matter of politics, but a ritualistic conclusion that was foreseen and embraced by those who understood the covenant's true nature? The infamous Spanish Armada of 1588 fits into this strange picture quite awkwardly. Mainstream history tells a simple story of powerful storms and divine winds that wrecked the massive fleet and miraculously saved England from conquest. In Spain, however, different rumors took root. Whispers that the Armada was destined for failure not because of the weather, but due to an internal betrayal or even a planned sacrifice. Some speculated that the dynasty, possibly under pressure from the Vatican, had a secret agenda. They might have sent the fleet into a hopeless battle as a grand ritual offering, a blood payment needed to uphold their larger pact. Why else would such a colossal and well-equipped military force disintegrate in such a bizarre way? What if the Armada's crushing defeat wasn't a failure at all, but the fulfillment of a solemn vow, sworn in the secrecy of Madrid's royal chapels and hidden behind the curtain of war? Even today, visitors to these chapels can see altars that sparkle with holy relics, while paintings of saints stare down from the walls in perpetual silence. And yet, there are some relics that are never shown, kept under lock and key and spoken of only in hushed tones. These secret artifacts include bones supposedly brought from Jerusalem, chalices with unknown histories, and crucifixes believed to contain splinters from much older belief systems. Why would these items be guarded so fiercely while others are put on public display? The only logical reason is that these relics were directly connected to forbidden histories, those of the Knights Templar, the earliest days of the Church, or perhaps even lost civilizations that have been deliberately scrubbed from our memory. This could mean the Spanish branch of the family had the most difficult guardianship of all, protecting artifacts that could completely unravel the official story of faith if they were ever made public. The golden age of Spain gleams in our history books, but the shadows it cast are rarely examined. For every treasure galleon that sailed across the Atlantic loaded with silver, other ships carried cargo that never appeared on any official manifest. These vessels transported sealed chests, manuscripts written in unbreakable codes, and artifacts that were rumored to exist but never publicly recognized. It's possible that some of these secrets still lie buried under Spanish soil or are locked away in vaults deep beneath the Escorial Palace, waiting for a day that may never arrive. If these things are real, then Spain's empire wasn't just built on military conquest and resource extraction. It was founded on protecting secrets passed down from long-vanished secret societies. This leaves us with a chilling paradox. The peak of Spain's glory occurred at the same time as its steady decline, as if the very source of its power was tainted, its dazzling success just a cover for a deep-seated fragility. Was this just a strange twist of history? Or was it all part of the plan, a ritual written into the covenant itself that bound the dynasty to both the church and to secrecy? What if Spain's so-called Golden Age was never about building an empire, but about protecting those shadows? What if the real goal was to ensure that certain knowledge, relics, and vows were passed safely into the future, even if it meant the empire itself had to crumble? The question echoes in the silent halls of Madrid's palaces, through the stone corridors of the Escorial, and in the tired eyes of the monarchs in their faded portraits. Did they know their power was an illusion, their crowns were on loan, and their empire was just a distraction from a duty far older and more mysterious than conquest? And if they were aware, did they embrace the silence as part of their duty, or did they endure it like a curse until the dynasty itself was finally consumed by shadows? Across Europe, the Holy Roman Emperors of the Habsburg line were crowned in magnificent ceremonies. Their grand processions wound through cities decorated with banners and filled with the sounds of bells and the scent of incense. But beneath all that public majesty was a weight that no painting or parade could ever capture, a burden hinted at in chronicles whose authors didn't dare to write too openly. With the crown, each Habsburg emperor inherited an invisible load of obligations, secret vows, and classified information that constrained him more tightly than his coronation robes. The spectacle was designed to impress the public, but the silence of these secrets pressed down on the emperor's shoulders like heavy chains. What was the true inheritance they received while kneeling at the altar? To most people, the title of Holy Roman Emperor signified absolute power. The reality, however, was a paradox. While they were called the rulers of the Christian world, their authority was completely dependent on the Vatican's approval and on ancient agreements made long before they were born. Some historical accounts suggest that every new emperor was initiated into a body of knowledge that was kept hidden from ordinary monarchs. This included fragments of histories older than Christianity itself, relics that had been smuggled out of Jerusalem, and documents salvaged from the fall of Constantinople. If this is true, their job wasn't just to rule, but to guard. This secret responsibility could be the reason for the haunted looks captured in their portraits. Their eyes seemed to stare right past the artist, into some unseen, profound depth. The story of Charles V brings this paradox into sharp focus. He ruled over more territory than any other leader of his time, with an empire that stretched from Spain to the Americas and from the Netherlands to Austria. In spite of all this power, he chose to abdicate his throne and retreat to a monastery. There, he lived out his days in quiet contemplation, as if the crown itself had become an unbearable weight. Historians often attribute this to simple burnout, but what if it was something more profound? What if the secret knowledge he was tasked with protecting became so overwhelming that he had to seek solitude just to escape the burden his glittering crown concealed? Was his abdication an act of weakness? Or was it the final, necessary step in fulfilling a sacred vow that only he understood? Other emperors dealt with the burden in their own ways. Rudolf II, for example, became so fascinated with alchemy that he transformed his court in Prague into a bustling maze of mystics and scholars. He spent his reign collecting ancient relics, rare manuscripts, and brilliant minds, creating a court that felt less like a palace and more like a secret archive. To the outside world, He seemed odd, unfocused, and perhaps even insane. But maybe his obsession was the logical outcome of being initiated into the dynasty's secret mission, the guardianship of dangerous information. If that's the case, his reign wasn't defined by chaos, but by continuation, a perfect reflection of the dynasty's hidden purpose. This burden was also intensely political, because the dynasty's many wars were not always started by choice. When the Vatican called, Habsburg emperors responded, sending armies against Protestants, heretics, and infidels. But one wonders if these wars were less about faith and more about preserving a covenant binding them to the altar. This meant defending secrets too dangerous for rebellious hands. Could the blood spilled across Europe have been not for religion, but for a silence guarded at any cost? Legends tell of ceremonies in hidden vaults, not cathedrals, where emperors viewed relics and manuscripts passed through generations. One ritual describes a new sovereign being shown a wax-sealed chest. Its contents were revealed only once and never spoken of again. What was inside? A relic, a document, forbidden knowledge? No one knows. Yet the pattern of secrecy is too consistent to be just an invention. Perhaps an emperor's greatest burden wasn't public duty, but private knowledge that haunted him until his death. Their fates bear the mark of this weight. Charles V's retreat into silence, Rudolf II's madness, Ferdinand II's desperate wars. Each ending reflects the strain of carrying an unspoken secret, not just personal fate. These men commanded armies, but their biggest battles may have been fought silently against this knowledge. Their crowns made them custodians, not sovereigns. Ruling was one thing, guarding the unguardable was another. Every emperor accepted this burden, bound by the blood and faith of their dynasty. The paradox sharpens when looking at their decline. Later emperors, weakened by inbreeding, still bore the same obligations. The burden remained even as their empire fractured and armies faltered. Why persist in a duty that seemed to destroy them? Unless the duty itself was sacred, its fulfillment more important than the dynasty's survival. Perhaps the Habsburgs were willing to collapse as long as their secrets remained hidden. Could their decline be seen not as failure, but as sacrifice, the final price of loyalty to a covenant older than their crowns? What is most unsettling is that this burden cannot be traced directly, only felt in echoes. It's in the haunted eyes of portraits, the strange obsessions of emperors, and the silences in chronicles where details should be. These absences speak louder than records, suggesting an inheritance behind the coronations that was not meant to be spoken. This legacy weighed heavier than gold, heavier than the empire itself. The question remains unanswered. Were the Habsburg emperors rulers of Europe, or were they guardians of shadows? Did they sit on thrones for their own sake, or as watchmen over relics, secrets, and covenants hidden from the world? The silence of history offers no reply, only the lingering image of gleaming crowns while invisible chains tightened unseen. Beneath the grandeur of palaces and cathedrals, a different empire existed, built not of land or armies but of pages, shelves, and silent manuscripts. These libraries were the hidden arteries of their dominion, repositories for knowledge outlawed elsewhere. To the public, the dynasty defended the faith by burning heretical texts and silencing dangerous voices. Yet behind closed doors, they gathered those very works into vaults, chaining and locking them away. Was this hypocrisy, or the fulfillment of a duty too dangerous to declare? The Hofburg State Hall impresses tourists, but even today holds unopened cabinets, uncatalogued volumes, and manuscripts whose existence is denied. Chroniclers whispered these books carried marks of suppressed orders like the Templars, alongside alchemical treatises and ancient grimoires. Why preserve what the Inquisition condemned unless their role was to guard, not destroy, ensuring dangerous memory was contained? Their libraries may have been less for study and more vaults for knowledge too volatile to release. The Jesuits, always close to Habsburg power, were custodians of this secrecy. Their ciphers and strange symbols decorate manuscripts, flourishes to the untrained eye, but keys to initiates. Even bindings concealed secrets, with double covers hiding texts within texts. Was this scholarly ingenuity or a deliberate system to preserve hidden wisdom across centuries? The silence of these shelves suggests a continuity no revolution could erase. Prague, under Rudolf II, became the most enigmatic court of all. He gathered manuscripts from every corner of Europe, filling halls with scrolls and volumes that blurred the line between science and sorcery. His collection included alchemical diagrams, astronomical charts, and texts rumored to be written by beings whose very existence is debated. These volumes, penned in tongues no living person could decipher, were protected like crown jewels. The emperor's own fascination grew into a full-blown obsession, prompting him to convert his palace into a sprawling labyrinth of books. While his critics labeled this an act of insanity, others saw it as a profound act of guardianship. It's possible he realized his family's ultimate purpose wasn't to command armies and lands, but to safeguard the knowledge of minds silenced long ago, voices from erased histories that still whispered from the ink of forbidden texts. Look at the Escorial in Spain, which functioned as something far beyond a mere palace monastery. Inside, a massive library built with symbolic geometry housed countless works that were officially outlawed across the continent. Certain books were even physically chained to their podiums, not to stop thieves, but to guarantee the ideas within remained contained. In a stunning paradox, the devout Catholic monarch Philip II, a fierce champion of the faith, personally protected the very heretical texts his own Inquisition was busy burning. It begs the question, why would he save what his empire sought to destroy? Was it possible the Habsburgs operated under a secret directive, a mission not to erase knowledge but to protect it? This unsettling contradiction points to a hidden agreement, a sacred duty to guard what could never be revealed and to preserve what must never be taught. Whispers from Austria tell of a secret vault deep beneath the Benedictine Abbey of Melk. According to legend, stone-lined chambers held ancient manuscripts, and only monks who had taken an oath of silence were allowed access. These texts supposedly included fragments of lost atlases with maps of unknown lands, charts of star constellations in unfamiliar patterns, and family trees that tracked lineages far more mysterious than just human bloodlines. Could these documents have held the last remaining memories of entire civilizations that were wiped from official records? Were they the final testaments of survivors from long-forgotten cataclysms? If that's true, it reframes the Habsburgs entirely. They weren't just rulers, they were archivists, tasked with protecting humanity's forbidden past while cloaked in the authority of an empire. The mystery deepens when you consider that while revolutions and wars were wiping out other great libraries, the Habsburg collections miraculously survived. Paris saw its archives burn and Rome was plundered by invaders, but the dynasty's books remained untouched. Was this just a string of good luck, or was some form of protection at play? It's almost as if their survival was part of a grander design, a mandate from destiny itself to shield these collections and ensure their knowledge continued. Maybe history itself schemed to protect these vaults, knowing they held irreplaceable pieces of a puzzle that, once lost, could never be put back together. This archive wasn't just made of books. Art became a vessel for preservation, with illuminated manuscripts hiding symbols that an untrained eye would never see. Secret codes were woven into the margins, tiny illustrations, and decorative swirls, all carrying secret messages. Some researchers even proposed that their music was coded, that pieces commissioned by Habsburgs contained mathematical structures reflecting the design of the cosmos. Was this just a cultural quirk, or was it a conscious effort to embed forbidden knowledge in beautiful forms that nobody would ever suspect? It suggests the dynasty's true library wasn't on shelves, but was spread throughout their art, music, and buildings, a secret archive hidden in plain sight as works of beauty. When we visit these great halls today, we see shelves filled with leather-bound history. What we miss is the powerful silence, the presence of locked cabinets, restricted areas, and catalogs with glaring omissions. These empty spaces are more telling than any text, hinting that something is still there, kept safe not for us, but for a time yet to come, or perhaps for no one at all. In the quiet of these libraries, a single question remains. Were the Habsburgs simply fanatics who collected heretical works to keep them suppressed? Or were they guardians of something far stranger? Humanity's lost memories, pieces of the past too vital to destroy but too dangerous to ever share. The truth remains locked away in those vaults of stone and paper, where silent words await a reader who may never be permitted to see them. For the Habsburgs, a marriage was so much more than a simple union. It was a complex weave of public performance, private ritual, and silent contracts. On the surface, the world saw grand festivals, celebratory parades, and chapels illuminated by candles where relatives, cousins, nieces, and uncles swore their vows. But behind the opulent display of silk and clouds of incense, a different kind of ceremony was taking place. This was a world of secret deals, quiet oaths, and unread treaties signed in private chambers, far from the public eye. So, what was really being confirmed at these weddings? Was it just a romantic bond, or was it the strengthening of ancient pacts that went far beyond political gain, tying the family closer to the Vatican and even older, shadowy powers? Every wedding served as a pivotal moment in history, swinging one door closed as another opened. The royal families of Europe became interconnected, like the intricate threads of a single, massive tapestry. And it wasn't just titles and fortunes that were exchanged during these unions. Gifts were given that were never put on display, and documents were signed that never became public record. Legends speak of wax-sealed scrolls and silk-wrapped relics being passed from one branch of the family to another, all under the cover of the festivities. Were these just symbolic gestures, or were they something far more significant, like pieces of Templar lore or powerful holy artifacts being kept safe by those who knew their true value? Perhaps the family's fixation on marrying within their own ranks was less about consolidating power and more about maintaining an unbroken chain of guardianship. This would ensure their secrets never fell outside the circle of trusted blood. Even the public ceremony was filled with hidden messages. Onlookers saw a bride and groom processing into a chapel, but they missed the symbols stitched into the clothing, the specific hand movements of the bishops, and the deliberate placement of every candle. As the timeline stretches back thousands of years, it is easy to feel small against the vastness of history. If you are enjoying this journey through time so far, comment the word ancient, so I know you're still with me. These ceremonies, it seems, hinted at layers unseen. Contemporary observers wrote of wedding processions that traced patterns mirroring the stars and of quiet Latin rites performed just moments before the public vows. It raises the question of whether onlookers witnessed only a fraction of the event, with the genuine ceremony unfolding in the shadows. If this were the case, a Habsburg marriage was less a holy sacrament and more a complex code, presenting one version of reality to the world while a different one was enacted in private. Take the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, a union widely credited as the foundation of Spain's might. While their wedding certainly united kingdoms, persistent whispers claim it also served to transfer ancient relics tied to Jerusalem, guarded for generations, directly into Habsburg possession. A similar model appears in later unions, such as the one between Maximilian and Mary of Burgundy. On the surface, it was a strategic political alliance, yet it curiously coincided with a dramatic and sudden surge in the family's wealth and influence. Could it be that these astonishing leaps forward were driven not by simple inheritance, but by gaining access to hidden libraries of knowledge and sacred artifacts, passed along discreetly as part of a dowry? The puzzle only gets more complex when you notice the recurring faces in these wedding portraits. Cousins married cousins, folding the bloodlines back onto themselves until the family tree began to resemble a hall of mirrors more than a set of branching limbs. To an outsider, this suggested weakness and decay, but from the inside, it may have been seen as a vital necessity, a conscious effort to safeguard a bloodline they believed was chosen long ago. Rumors claimed a sacred covenant demanded this purity, with each marriage acting as a renewal of that ancient promise. Is it possible that the resulting deformities, chronic illnesses, and personal tragedies were willingly accepted as a form of sacrifice? A terrible but necessary cost to protect the secrets carried within their lineage. Behind the celebratory feasts, where musicians played and the wine flowed freely, other agreements were being finalized in back rooms. These contracts were almost never filed in the official state archives. Instead, they were secured in private family collections, with some later discovered bearing bizarre signatures, symbols that looked like Templar crosses or seals understood only by a select few in the clergy. What are we to think of markings like these? Were they merely the fanciful additions of superstitious scribes? Or were they signs that every marriage also functioned as a pact, strengthening ties not just within the dynasty, but to a clandestine order that never truly disappeared? The Vatican's involvement in these weddings was simultaneously public and completely hidden. While priests stood at the altar, cardinals were busy in antechambers, guaranteeing that every match served the grander designs of the Church. The marriages became instruments not just of statecraft, but of spiritual obedience, ensuring the Habsburgs' loyalty to Rome never wavered. Still, rumors circulated that the Vatican also used these unions as secure channels for transferring duties, relics, and secret information between different branches of the family. Was the Church simply giving its blessing to love and political strategy? Or was it carefully managing the continuity of a sacred trust, making sure that what once belonged to forbidden orders never fell into the wrong hands? This pattern held firm even as the dynasty began to wane. The frail Charles II of Spain, though he would have no children, was married twice. Both unions were arranged with an extraordinary sense of urgency by the Vatican, suggesting something far greater than royal succession was at stake. Some whispered that priceless relics or manuscripts were being quietly moved through his queens, disguised as wedding gifts or dowry payments. Was the desperate push for these marriages a final, frantic attempt to safeguard something invaluable before the bloodline collapsed entirely? If so, then even his weakness and his tragic inability to speak for himself became just another part of the ritual. The memory of these weddings survives not only in dusty records, but also in local folklore. For centuries, villagers told stories of candles that refused to light during certain ceremonies, or of violent storms that erupted the moment vows were exchanged. Some legends even claim that church bells would begin to ring on their own at the instant of union, as if unseen forces were confirming the pact. To a modern ear, these sound like simple superstitions. But legends are often how communities preserve memories that have been warped by time. Perhaps they are echoes of a feeling that these weddings were more than just human events, that something immense and ancient was watching from the shadows, waiting for the vows to be spoken once more. What remains so unsettling is the sheer consistency with which these unions preserved the family's power. Borders were redrawn, devastating wars were fought, and heirs died unexpectedly, yet through marriage, the dynasty always endured. Was this just the work of shrewd and pragmatic rulers, or was it proof of a deeper, unspoken mission? If every wedding was also a transfer of a sacred guardianship, then the Habsburg marriages were less about celebration and more about performing a rite of continuity, binding not only their kingdoms but also their secrets across the centuries. The question still hangs in the air, like a whisper in a long-abandoned chapel. What if the most important vows the Habsburgs made were never the ones spoken before an audience, but those written in hidden contracts, sealed in private vaults, and murmured only between a monarch and a cleric? What if every wedding was less about love or politics, and more about a desperate, ongoing effort to ensure that a forbidden legacy would never be broken, never be lost, and never fade into the night? In the great halls of power, kings have always had their counselors. Yet within the Habsburg courts, a different kind of advisor seemed to be present, one unlike the usual ministers and diplomats. Appearing as priests, scholars, or personal confessors, these figures offered guidance in hushed tones, shaping policies that went far beyond their official roles. Their words were often cryptic, their true meanings wrapped in symbols. Their advice came not as direct commands, but as perplexing riddles. Court chroniclers allude to their powerful influence, but almost never record their names, as if an oath or a deep-seated fear prevented them from doing so. Who could these shadowy figures have been, if not agents of the Jesuits, masters of ciphers and protectors of secrets that predated the dynasty itself. The Jesuit order, formed during the chaotic 16th century, presented itself as a militant extension of the Church, sworn to defend the faith against heresy with unmatched intellect and rigid discipline. And yet, an aura of profound mystery always surrounded them. Their internal communications were famously encrypted, their ultimate loyalties were the subject of constant speculation, and their secret missions spanned the entire globe. And while the world saw them as simple missionaries and teachers, the Habsburgs knew them as something far different. They were the whispering figures in the dark, the ones who could decipher secrets too daunting for any ruler to face alone. This begs the question, were the Jesuits just offering religious counsel, or were they secretly channeling a stream of guarded information directly from the Vatican's archives into the heart of the empire? Think about the uncanny pattern of their power. A Jesuit presence was a certainty in any land under Habsburg control, with their schools invariably built in the shadow of palaces and their priests always occupying seats beside the sovereign. Their role involved tutoring young princes, guiding powerful queens, and advising emperors. Yet their most critical function went beyond simple counsel. They were couriers of encrypted documents, carrying messages in complex codes that no one outside their circle could possibly break. According to some historians, these encoded missives held directives for state policy as well as for sacred rituals, spelling out which artifacts required protection, which manuscripts needed safeguarding, and which marriages had to be orchestrated. You have to wonder why such guidance would need to be hidden in code, unless the contents were simply too perilous to be written openly. What if the dynasty's entire future hinged on the secrets locked within these messages? Invisible threads steering the bloodline through a maze of ancient duties. The order's well-known secrecy only fueled the belief that their purpose was far greater than education. The Jesuits' mastery of languages, sciences, and philosophy made them indispensable assets. Their allegiance, however, was never truly to a king or queen. It was sworn to the Vatican, and possibly to an even more ancient pact. If they guided an emperor, it wasn't for the sake of the dynasty's fame, but for the fulfillment of the mission they were given. This raises a startling possibility. Were the Habsburgs less like monarchs and more like instruments, quietly navigated by priests who spoke truths that were never meant for public ears? Stories tell of letters delivered by Jesuit hands, their wax seals bearing symbols not of Rome, but of much older societies, marks that looked eerily like Templar crosses or other esoteric emblems. Some speculate these were directions for safeguarding relics, while others believe they held pieces of forgotten holy texts. The dynasty followed the instructions in these letters with a strange and unwavering obedience, even when the orders made no political sense. Marriages were forged at the Vatican's command. Wars were waged against impossible odds. Alliances were made that defied all logic. Each action seems to carry the signature of an unseen director. Was it a brilliant political game, or was it strict adherence to a script written centuries before? This mystery deepens when you see how emperors both relied upon and dreaded their Jesuit confessors. These men listened to their deepest secrets, forgave their gravest sins, and offered them counsel. At the same time, they were sending detailed reports back to Rome, guaranteeing that no ruler ever truly acted independently. The very ritual of confession was transformed into a pipeline, allowing the Vatican to mold the empire's policies from afar. Were the emperors confessing their sins, or were they confessing state secrets? These secrets could then be converted into new coded orders that bound the dynasty even more tightly to its hidden purpose. Even the architecture of the time hints at the extent of the Jesuits' sway. Churches they designed often had symbols cleverly hidden within the stonework. To an ordinary churchgoer, the geometric patterns, Latin inscriptions, and elaborate frescoes were just decoration. But to those in the know, they were ciphers. Many of these churches were built right next to Habsburg palaces, a daily, physical reminder of the unseen hand that was shaping their destiny. Could these structures have been more than just places of prayer? Perhaps they also served as vaults for coded information, a stone and mortar ledger of the dynasty's sacred duty. The Jesuits' reach was global, stretching into the Americas, Asia, and Africa. On their missions, they accumulated vast amounts of knowledge about unknown lands, mapping the stars, documenting new languages, and gathering unique artifacts. A great deal of this intelligence was funneled back to Europe, and some legends claim it ended up in the Habsburgs' private collections. Were the Jesuits merely working for the Church, or were they also building the dynasty's library of forbidden lore, stocking it with fragments gathered from every corner of the world? If that's true, every mission and every journey was both a religious and an archival endeavor, collecting pieces of a puzzle far too large for any one generation to solve. As the order's power grew, suspicion eventually turned into outright fear. The Jesuits were suppressed and even kicked out of several kingdoms, accused of controlling monarchs and threatening their authority. And yet, the Habsburgs never completely broke with them. They seemed to understand that their own fate was inextricably linked with the order's secrets. Cutting those ties would have meant discarding the very script that had guided them for centuries. Could the entire suppression have been a public spectacle, a show designed to hide the ongoing influence of a group too entrenched to ever be removed? The question remains, were the Jesuits simply advisors, or were they the secret authors of history, writing the Habsburgs' fate in codes and whispers? Did the dynasty rule Europe, or was it merely an instrument for messages passed silently from a vault to a throne? The silence of their archives suggests that, for generations, the truth has remained locked away, waiting for someone who can read what was never meant to be said aloud. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 is often told as a story of bad weather and clever tactics, a mix of English luck and Spanish failure. But this official history is filled with lingering shadows and details that just don't fit the simple explanations found in textbooks. How could the mightiest fleet of its time, built with the riches of an empire and given the Pope's personal blessing, fall apart so spectacularly? Was it really just the winds and waves that brought down the fleet, or was something else at play? It's a question that suggests the possibility of a secret agreement masked by the theater of war, where a devastating defeat was actually a calculated sacrifice. For Philip II, the Armada was conceived as a sacred undertaking, far more than a simple military campaign. Banners of the cross flew from every mast, framing the entire operation as a modern crusade aimed at Protestant England. The decks were walked by priests, holy relics were brought aboard for protection, and blessings were bestowed as if the fleet itself were a great floating cathedral. The result, however, was utter devastation. Ships were mercilessly wrecked upon foreign shores, their sailors left to drown or starve, and Spain's carefully crafted image of invincibility was completely shattered. If a storm was the sole culprit, its timing was extraordinarily convenient, arriving at the precise moment the dynasty's enemies were most in need of a miracle. Was this really just a matter of chance? Or had the Armada been consigned to its fate long before it ever left port? Back in Madrid, hushed rumors suggested the catastrophe had been anticipated. Some said the king was warned by his astrologers, while others spoke of Jesuit confessors who described foreboding omens. A more startling whisper implied the Vatican itself had shown a strange reluctance, hesitant to support a force that could disrupt the delicate balance of power it worked so hard to preserve. Could the Armada have been sent to its doom not just with Rome's awareness, but as a direct result of it? Its destruction could have served as a ritual offering, a blood payment made to protect even greater secrets. In this light, the thousands who died were not casualties of war, but sacrificial victims. Their fleet became a vessel given to the sea, fulfilling unspoken vows that no one would ever dare commit to paper. The ships were carrying more than just soldiers and cannons. According to chroniclers, they were also loaded with sealed chests whose contents were a closely guarded secret. Were these simply standard supplies, or did they hold relics that were meant for delivery in England following a successful invasion? Some theories propose that manuscripts, perhaps even lost fragments of Templar knowledge, were hidden within. These artifacts might have been destined for secret safe houses in the north, contingent on the Armada's victory. If that's true, their loss represented not just a military failure, but the submersion of esoteric knowledge into the depths of the ocean. These are secrets now buried in silent wrecks that lie beneath the waves to this day. What if the Armada's primary objective was never conquest at all, but rather the transfer of a forbidden heritage under the perfect cover of war? The paradox only grows when you look at how the dynasty reacted to the loss. Spain did not collapse. The Habsburgs, while shaken, continued their rule across Europe, and the nation remained a formidable power. Perhaps the Armada's destruction was not a ruinous loss, but a type of exchange, the fulfillment of a hidden agreement where a visible defeat was used to conceal an invisible victory. By surrendering ships and men, the dynasty may have secured the survival of something it deemed far more precious: its role as the guardian of secrets entrusted to it by the Vatican. The entire disaster might have been a sacrifice to ensure the continuity of that mission, preventing those secrets from ever falling into Protestant hands. Local legends from the Galatian coast seem to support this, telling of peculiar cargo washing ashore from the wrecks. They speak of sealed containers the villagers were too terrified to open, believing them to be cursed. Fishermen reported finding objects that emitted a faint glow in the dark, only to have them quickly confiscated by mysterious monks. While these stories are often dismissed as folklore, they echo with a troubling consistency. Could the Armada have been carrying relics whose loss was intentional? Their disappearance at sea would have guaranteed they were never captured, and their existence never revealed, hidden forever beneath the ocean or in remote abbeys. Even England's victory seems marked by strange signs. In her famous speech, Queen Elizabeth I attributed the wind to a Protestant wind sent by God. Yet, the rhetoric feels almost too polished, as if the official story was crafted before the storms even hit. Was England's salvation truly a matter of favorable weather, or was the storm itself an anticipated event, a force either summoned or allowed by powers far beyond any monarch? If the Vatican and the dynasty had a reason to accept defeat, then England's triumph may have been less a divine intervention and more a well-staged performance. The world was shown one narrative, while a completely different one unfolded behind the scenes. The Armada's demise became a powerful symbol of Spain's fragile golden age, but symbols are often used as masks. What if the fleet's ruin was never about Spain's failure, but about guaranteeing the dynasty's secret mission could continue without interruption? The loss may have been a necessary spectacle, a public defeat that hid a private success. When viewed this way, history's simple explanations crumble, leaving behind a question that's too unsettling to dismiss. Was the greatest naval disaster of the era not a failure, but a ritual, a deliberate offering on the altar of secrecy? But if the sea was the altar for one sacrifice, the heart of Europe was being prepared for another, a devastating ritual of fire and steel. Its epicenter was Prague. There, rising above a maze of cobbled streets, stood Hradčany Castle, a fortress that hummed with arcane experiments and secret prayers. The court of Emperor Rudolf II had become less a palace and more of an alchemical crucible, a place where science, religion, and forbidden knowledge merged into a single pursuit. Chroniclers described workshops where furnaces glowed like sacred altars. As scholars labored over strange devices and sprawling parchments that depicted the cosmos and the hierarchies of angels. These weren't just drawings, they were complex geometries fusing the cosmos with scripture. To outsiders, it looked like madness. But for those in the know, Prague was the stage for an ancient quest for immortality, hidden under the guise of simple curiosity. Emperor Rudolf II summoned alchemists from across Europe, men like John Dee and Edward Kelly, whose reputations flickered between mystic and fraud. He built an unrivaled collection of relics, texts, and strange instruments. The official story was he sought the philosopher's stone for gold, but whispers claimed his true target was life itself, extending it, preserving it, making time bend to his bloodline. The family's obsession with pure lineage suddenly seems like part of this same quest for a continuity that could defy decay. Alchemy, then, wasn't a hobby, but a vital ritual for the dynasty's secret mission. Prague's court was nicknamed the Athens of the North, but its work was secret, unlike the open academies of Greece. Experiments were hidden, attended by priests and scholars alike in rooms with shuttered windows. The air was thick with strange vapors, while potions glowed and chalk symbols lingered on the floors. Visitors heard chants mixing Latin with unknown tongues, a sound that was both prayer and incantation. It was a strange fusion of science and religion. Legends of Rudolph's Cabinet of Curiosities persist. It supposedly held meteorite fragments, saints' bones, Jerusalem relics, and mysterious items from Jesuit missions. Rumors spoke of a crystal skull and undecipherable books like the Voynich manuscript. These were not mere trinkets, but pieces of a fragmented historical puzzle, gathered in a single vault by a dynasty tasked with guarding it. Perhaps Rudolph's obsession wasn't personal, but a mission to preserve a history others had tried to erase. This alchemical vision began to reshape Prague's architecture. The city's ancient astronomical clock was reinterpreted, its movements synced with castle experiments. New Habsburg-funded churches were built with geometric patterns from alchemical texts. Was the city itself becoming a giant laboratory, a living document where buildings and stars conspired to safeguard knowledge? Rudolph's Prague was more than a capital. It was a vault, encoding forbidden science into its very streets. The real paradox is the Church's role. Officially, the occult was condemned, yet the Vatican allowed Rudolph's work, even sending Jesuit observers. Why? Unless these pursuits served a secret purpose, ensuring this knowledge survived in safe hands. Perhaps Rudolph wasn't a rebel, but was following unspoken orders to preserve ancient lore. His obsession looks less like madness and more like guardianship, and obedience to a much older plan. The people of Prague whispered of unnatural lights glowing from the castle. They told tales of glowing figures, bells ringing on their own, and detached shadows. Folklore called Rudolph a sorcerer king, but maybe these stories were just memories of misunderstood rituals. What if the lights were echoes of experiments blending relics, prayer, and alchemical fire to find the bridge to the eternal? Rudolph's downfall mirrored his obsessions. He became a recluse as his health and empire failed, clinging to his manuscripts as enemies closed in. After his death, the treasures vanished, taken to secret monasteries and libraries under imperial and Vatican seal. Their location is a mystery, but the fact they were saved at all implies a deliberate plan, as if even his failure was part of the design. Maybe the goal was never transmutation, but preservation. So was Rudolf II a mad emperor, or the last ruler to openly pursue the dynasty's true mission of protecting knowledge that history tried to forget? The vaults are silent. All that's left are whispers of strange lights, unreadable books, and portraits of faces haunted by more than power. The question lingers: was alchemy just a diversion, or was it the visible sign of a hidden flame, a flame first carried from the Templars? That flame had to be managed. Some of it was hidden away in vaults, written in Jesuit codes, and kept safe in Prague's shadows, waiting for the right time, or perhaps never to be seen at all. This brings us to one of Europe's most brutal chapters, the 30 Years' War. It's a conflict that tore through the 17th century, a relentless hurricane of violence and death. The official story pins it on religion, a straightforward clash between Catholics and Protestants. But when you look at the sheer, mind-boggling devastation, that simple explanation starts to fall apart. We're talking about whole regions turned into wastelands, populations decimated by famine, and ghost towns where villages once stood. Some historical accounts suggest that Central Europe lost a staggering one-third of its people. And this is where a huge question emerges from the ashes. The Habsburgs were meant to be the champions of the Catholic faith, so why did their own lands suffer so profoundly? What if the war wasn't about faith at all, but about memory? Imagine a conscious effort to unravel the very fabric of Europe's history, hiding a truth at its center that was never meant to see the light of day. While the Habsburg dynasty publicly fought to uphold Catholic dominance, their military actions often seemed bizarrely counterproductive. Campaigns would stretch on for no good strategic reason, almost as if winning wasn't the point. Maybe the objective was pure, unadulterated destruction. Cities weren't just conquered, they were erased from the map. Priceless manuscripts went up in smoke, abbeys were plundered, and entire archives were incinerated. You have to ask, was all this just the tragic byproduct of war, or was it the primary goal? Was this a calculated campaign to rewrite the past by simply burning the evidence? If this theory holds, then the conflict was as much an archival war as a political one, with battles waged in libraries just as fiercely as on the fields of Europe. Take the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, a crucial early moment. After a Protestant uprising in Bohemia was decisively put down, the winners did something strange. They didn't just punish their enemies, they went straight for their books. Entire libraries were confiscated. Manuscripts were taken from scholars and nobles and then carted off to Vienna and Rome. While some were destroyed, a great many were simply locked away, hidden from public view forever. This became a recurring theme, a war presented as a religious struggle providing the perfect cover for a systematic purge of information. It makes you wonder if the Habsburgs' real goal wasn't territorial gain, but to become the sole guardians of knowledge that was never supposed to get out. The fall of Magdeburg in 1631 presents the same puzzling pattern. Eyewitness reports paint a horrific picture of a city consumed by fire, with tens of thousands of people killed in the streets. But a fascinating detail is often overlooked. Before the city was overrun, the cathedral's treasury was carefully emptied, and its precious contents were escorted away by guards. Who organized this quiet, orderly removal amidst such total carnage? If the sacking was truly as frenzied as history tells us, how was this careful preservation even possible? The only logical answer is that the chaos was a performance, and the destruction was a smokescreen for a highly selective rescue mission. When you start digging into Jesuit archives, decoded messages allude to special cargo being secured during military operations. The language is intentionally obscure, but the meaning is deeply unsettling. It suggests that armies weren't just marching for territory. They were on retrieval missions for specific artifacts, books, and pieces of forbidden knowledge tucked away in monasteries and towns. The average soldier on the ground probably thought he was fighting for God, but his commanders were operating under secret instructions. This reframes the entire conflict. What if these weren't religious campaigns but massive, coordinated collection efforts? A holy war serving as the perfect cover to scour Europe for scattered pieces of a dangerous puzzle and consolidate them under Habsburg control. The sheer length of the war also feeds this suspicion. 30 years of non-stop fighting was economically ruinous. It bankrupted empires, shattered communities, and bled treasuries dry. So why would the dynasty keep it going? Why endure such a catastrophic struggle if the goal wasn't land or power? Maybe 3 decades was the exact amount of time needed for a total reset, to bury the past so completely that new generations would be born without any memory of what came before. Suddenly, the war's absurdity transforms into cold, calculated purpose. It becomes a slow, deliberate ritual designed to leave Europe scarred, but also ready to be reshaped, its history literally rewritten in blood. Local legends from Prague tell of mysterious wagons leaving the city late at night under heavy guard. They were said to be filled with crates of books and manuscripts from plundered libraries. But these weren't headed for Vienna. The whispers said their destination was secret monasteries buried deep in the Alps, far from the reach of any army. People spoke of finding books with strange, unreadable text, diagrams of unknown constellations and complex machines, and histories of entire civilizations that our official records have no mention of. If any of that is true, it means the war wasn't just about destruction. It was also about preservation, ensuring the most sensitive pieces of the old world survived in secret vaults, protected by the combined power of the dynasty and the Pope. This leads to the biggest contradiction of all. The Habsburgs claim to be saving Christendom, so why was Christendom left in such a broken, weakened state, with vast silences where its history used to be? The answer might be that unity was never the goal. The real objective may have been division, and the mission was erasure, not preservation for the masses. By engineering this continental reset, the dynasty may have fulfilled a secret obligation, to snip away forbidden historical threads, destroy dangerous narratives, and keep the remaining fragments under their exclusive control. This war, then, wasn't a fight over faith, but a ritual of forgetting, a massive fire meant to purify history itself. The conflict officially ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. Europe was a different place. Borders were redrawn, the Holy Roman Empire was fatally weakened, and power began to shift. Historians mark this as the dawn of the modern state and the twilight of a unified Christendom. But what was the hidden accomplishment? What happened behind the scenes? Countless libraries were gone, priceless manuscripts had disappeared, sacred relics were hidden, and a generation of voices had been permanently silenced. What if the Peace of Westphalia wasn't about peace at all, but about locking a door on the past and sealing a newly edited version of reality? The war's true victory wasn't won with cannons and muskets, but in the quiet that followed, a world where people no longer even knew what they had forgotten. Scars from the devastation remained, but the wounds left by silence run much deeper. When we study the 30 Years' War today, we see battle statistics, political treaties, and famous generals. But just beneath the surface of those facts is the chilling ghost of something much older, something deliberately wiped from our collective memory in the fog of war. Was this Europe's greatest religious catastrophe? Or was it the Habsburg dynasty's most brilliant and secret success? An act of historical revision so total, so profound, that even now we struggle to recall what was erased. High above a serene curve of the Danube River, Melk Abbey's magnificent Baroque towers stand sentinel over the water, like eternal guardians. Visitors flock to admire its breathtaking frescoes and celebrated libraries, but almost none sense the profound quiet emanating from deep within its stone vaults, a silence maintained by monks who have stood watch for generations. While the Abbey's main library is famous for its splendor, folklore whispers of a different collection behind the gilded doors and ornate ceilings. This secret chamber, accessible only to the initiated, is said to hold manuscripts sealed away in total darkness. It's entirely possible that this is one of the dynasty's most secure vaults, a place for fragments of history collected through endless conflict and secret pacts, protected not by soldiers, but by a brotherhood sworn to absolute silence. This abbey's clandestine reputation extends all the way back to the Middle Ages. Tales from pilgrims described monks hauling locked chests into the abbey under the cover of night, with their contents remaining a complete mystery. Rumors swirled that the chests originated in Vienna, Prague, or even distant lands south of the Alps. One has to wonder if these were merely religious artifacts, or if they contained something far more significant, like fragments of knowledge captured during the 30 Years' War. Imagine manuscripts taken from defiant nobles and scholars, now hidden away where no uprising could ever recover them. If that's the case, Melk was preserving not just faith, but a specific version of memory, one intentionally wiped from public record but kept safe in the quiet beneath its spires. The public library is immense, showcasing thousands of volumes with gold-leafed spines arranged in perfect, harmonious order. But for centuries, observant visitors have pointed out that some shelves are permanently sealed and specific cabinets remain perpetually locked. The keys are said to be in the sole possession of abbots who have taken an oath of secrecy. Official catalogs mysteriously leave out certain titles, and any inquiries are met with vague replies from the monks about forbidden texts, locked away for the so-called protection of souls. It begs the question, what kind of information is so perilous that a book containing it cannot even be named in a catalog? Is it possible these are the remnants of the same esoteric knowledge once held by the Knights Templar, spoken of in the alchemical courts of Prague, or encrypted in Jesuit codes? The possibility hangs in the air of the silent halls, like the faint scent of incense. Local legends from the nearby villages describe incredible manuscripts detailing entire civilizations lost to ancient floods, chronicles of continents across the sea visited long before Columbus, and blueprints for machines that were technologically impossible for their era. While the villagers might dismiss these as fairy tales, the stories have endured for centuries, consistently linked to Melk's vaults and the theme of forbidden knowledge. Folklore can certainly exaggerate, but but it seldom materializes from nothing. Maybe the Abbey's quiet halls conceal truths too immense for the world to handle, truths that could shatter the accepted history of Europe if they were ever brought to light. The puzzle becomes even more complex when you remember the dynasty's unwavering support for the Church. The Habsburgs showered Melk with their patronage, granting it vast lands, incredible wealth, and royal protection. Why would they show such singular devotion to this one abbey? The only logical answer is that it served as more than a religious house. It was a secure vault, a clandestine safe house for the powerful covenant between the dynasty and the Vatican. As priceless relics and manuscripts were funneled into Melk's depths, the Habsburgs guaranteed their safety by entrusting them to monks, whose sacred vows were a far stronger bond than any iron chain. Perhaps Melk was selected for this very reason. Its silence was absolute, and its remote location was ideal for secrets never intended for the public. The architecture itself seems to suggest a hidden purpose. Below the library, a network of chambers is laid out with remarkable precision, with proportions that reflect principles of sacred geometry. Researchers have even identified alignments with celestial movements, where shafts of sunlight illuminate the halls on specific days like solstices and equinoxes. Are these just architectural quirks, or are they coded messages indicating the abbey is a container for secret wisdom? It suggests the stones were laid not just for worship, but for preservation. Walking through its corridors, you can sense an atmosphere, a weight that transcends art, and a quiet that feels more profound than prayer itself. During the 18th century Enlightenment, a wave of reform led to the closure of monasteries across Europe, yet Melk survived. Its vaults remained sealed, its manuscripts untouched. You have to wonder how it avoided the fate that befell so many others. A likely explanation is that its contents were guarded by more than just monks. The full weight of the dynasty made the abbey untouchable. If this is true, the silence around its secret vaults was a calculated act of preservation, allowing its secrets to pass undisturbed into the modern era. Is this unbroken history just a coincidence, or is it evidence of a pact so powerful it remains in effect even today? Modern scholars admire the Abbey's beautiful illuminated manuscripts and masterful artistry, but even they concede that its catalog has noticeable gaps. There are rumors of entire volumes that have never been seen, and some researchers allege that whole collections are absent from the official record, tucked away in areas completely off-limits to visitors. Why would such intense secrecy be necessary in our modern age of information? Unless the knowledge in those books is still deemed too dangerous, too radical, or simply too forbidden for us. It's possible the dynasty's role as guardian continues, not through royal decree and military might, but through the quiet dedication of monks who preserve pieces of a past we are not yet allowed to remember. Melk's silence is all-encompassing. Tourists depart captivated by its beauty, completely oblivious to the fact that, just beneath the frescoes and gilded ceilings, there might be texts that could rewrite the very foundations of history. And as the monks offer a knowing smile, the church bells chime, and the Danube River glides by, carrying centuries of secrets locked away in stone. What if this abbey isn't just a house of worship, but one of the final repositories of a covenant that has defined the fate of Europe? What if its stillness isn't a void, but a form of active protection? It represents the last reverberation of a dynasty that governed a global empire, yet whose most important illumination is still kept from sight. History books present the Habsburg downfall as a gradual decay, a collapse brought on by the immense pressure of conflicts, debts, and social upheavals. However, a closer look at the evidence suggests this collapse was less about decay and more about intention. It feels as if the dynasty wasn't defeated but was instead permitted to recede, having completed a mission that was incompatible with the modern era. Is it possible their empire was never meant to be permanent, but to last only as long as needed to protect what they were entrusted with? By the 18th century, the dynasty's influence had already started to splinter. The death of Charles II marked the end of the Spanish branch, allowing the Bourbon line to take its throne. While the Austrian branch lasted longer, its stability weakened as its authority was contested by emerging nation-states. Amid this decline, however, a single element never wavered: the intense secrecy maintained around their vaults, libraries, and sacred artifacts. Their control over territory may have diminished, but their role as guardians appeared to be as strong as ever. Maybe this was their ultimate purpose, and with that mission fulfilled, the dynasty itself was allowed to fade away. What if their collapse wasn't a catastrophe, but a resolution? It was the final page of a story conceived long before Maria Theresa, the last Habsburg by name, fought to hold the dynasty's sprawling territories together. She enacted military reforms, streamlined the government, and tried to shield the empire from the encroaching forces of modernity. But beneath these public political struggles, rumors circulated about a queen who dedicated countless hours to prayer in private chapels and studied ancient manuscripts within the Habsburg palace's locked archives. Was she merely a modernizer, or was she the ultimate guardian, making sure that centuries of preserved knowledge remained secure as her lineage transitioned into the House of Habsburg-Lorraine? Perhaps her reforms served as a clever diversion, while her real work was the quiet continuation of the sacred pact her ancestors had honored. The dynasty's actions in the 19th century are even more revealing. While revolutions ignited across Europe, championing ideals of liberty and national identity, the Habsburgs held fast to symbols that transcended politics. They organized processions with holy relics, appealed to divine faith, and conducted ceremonies that seemed focused more on preserving continuity than on actual governance. As their political authority faded, they tightened their grip on what was truly important. Their vaults stayed locked, and their secrets remained guarded. Why would they uphold this silence while their entire empire was crumbling around them? The only logical answer is that the silence itself was their final, most crucial duty, more important than any crown or throne. The First World War dealt the fatal blow. Franz Joseph's long reign saw his empire become brittle, torn apart by nationalism and worn down by the demands of a new age. His nephew, Franz Ferdinand, whose murder ignited the war, came to symbolize the dynasty's fragility. Yet there are peculiar echoes surrounding his death as well. It's been reported that he maintained private archives at Konapisht Castle, overflowing with manuscripts and artifacts he had collected from all over Europe. Following his death, these archives disappeared, with many items reportedly taken away under orders that have never been traced. Could this have been the real inheritance he died to protect, not his claim to a throne, but the contents of his vault? By 1918, the Habsburg monarchy was officially dissolved. The victorious powers carved up its empire, intent on erasing its influence. But the silence held firm. Vaults did not open, abbeys continued to protect their manuscripts, and the Vatican's archives only seemed to grow more secretive. If the dynasty had simply been a political failure, why did its tradition of secrecy survive so completely? It could be because their guardianship had been passed on. With their duty fulfilled, their role was no longer required. The empire was gone, but the covenant lived on, transferred to new, unseen hands. The paradox leaves one unsettled. How did a dynasty that controlled half the world for centuries disappear so rapidly? Its territories were reformed into republics, and its crowns were put aside. This quick dissolution only makes sense if the empire itself was a secondary concern, a temporary structure built to fulfill a hidden objective. After that objective was met, the structure was allowed to be dismantled and its components scattered. What appears to be a total collapse might have been a quiet completion, the conclusion of a dynasty that had performed its duty with unwavering loyalty for centuries. Legend even holds that the last emperor, Charles I, carried a sealed package with him into exile after the war, refusing to let it out of his sight until the day he died. Its contents remain a mystery, known only for being kept away from all observers. Was it a sacred relic, an ancient manuscript, or just a symbol of their enduring mission? Regardless of what it was, it implies that the dynasty's final action was one of guardianship, not of surrender, carrying the last fragments of a dangerous covenant into exile. Today, the Habsburgs live as private citizens. Their crowns are displayed in museums, and their palaces are now attractions for tourists. And yet, the silence is still palpable. Vaults are still locked, manuscripts sit unread, and relics are kept away from public scrutiny. It could be that the dynasty never truly went away at all. Perhaps their work continues discreetly, without the thrones and titles, but still bound by the duty of guardianship, their bloodline a living archive of secrets far older than empires. Their public fall might have been the perfect cover, a strategy to safeguard their covenant in a world that would no longer openly tolerate it. The dynasty's end, therefore, looks less like a failure and more like a deliberate act of concealment. They disappeared as rulers, but their silence remained, a presence heavier than any crown and older than any empire. And so, a question hangs like a shadow over the ruins of their domain. Did the Habsburgs really fall? Or did they just quietly close the door, presenting us with the illusion of an ending while their true legacy continues, sealed away in vaults we may never be allowed to see? We have reached the edge of the map for tonight. The archives of Mythic Index are closing, but the history remains. If this journey offered you rest or realization, please leave a like before you go. Comment which era or myth you wish to explore in our next session, and subscribe to ensure the library doors are open for you again tomorrow.